Hello, everybody, and welcome to Creation Myths. I haven't put anything out in over a week at this point because I've been sick. You could probably still hear that. I apologize for my voice. I'll also note that I may have to just scoot partway through this if I run too long, and if that's the case, I'll just resume it at some other point. I apologize in advance if that happens. But what we're doing here tonight should be fun. What we're doing is a responding to critics, which is something I haven't done in a little while. And I really like to use these as an opportunity, not just to point out the problems with the arguments that we see from creationists, but also to point out how those arguments work as well. And this is a really good example of that. This instance gives us a nice illustration of some of the tactics that we see. So to introduce this, let me just say that I normally like to deal with arguments from the professional creationist, right? That's who I like to have on the channel. That's who I feature when I'm doing a creation myth. I reference organizations like AIG and professionals like Dr. Rob Carter or Dr. Stephen Meyer, right? But in this example, we're just dealing with, rando on the internet, and that's fine. It's important to know how those conversations go as well, because a lot of this conversation, this evolution versus creationism conversation, takes place on the internet, and it's going to be a lot of randos on the internet just kind of yelling. So it's important to see, I think, how those arguments go as well and illustrate exactly kind of the tactics and the tricks that creationists employ when they're having these conversations. Now, oftentimes the arguments that we get in those cases are not as crisp, they're not as clear as the arguments you get from the professional organizations. Are kind of laundered through this game of telephone and they come out the other side somewhat garbled. But again, it's useful to see how the arguments are formulated when they're not coming from, Discovery Institute or Creation Ministries International or something like that. So the backstory with what we're doing here is actually a young earth creationist. The channel is Paleologos. Peter at Paleologos did a short video on the hyoid bone in humans, which is not a bone that I was familiar with prior to like last week. But it's a bone that lots of different organisms share. And on that video, someone you may know, someone I've actually hosted on the channel before, way back in the day, named Standing for Truth, he commented on that. And I'm just going to pull up a screenshot of the comment here just to show you. So he actually said, someone said to him in the comments of this video on Paleologos something about, I forget what it doesn't matter. But he responded to this person, Betty, said, pick my top 5 errors or falsehoods and we will debate them live. Let's see you defend your assertions. I'll be waiting. Okay, sure. So I'm not Betty, but I responded anyway because, why not, right? So I said, okay, here's your top 5. Confusing diversity and divergence. Those 2 separate things that SFT has conflated in the past. Not realizing inbreeding and hypermutating are opposites. He's actually basically said that's the same. Repeatedly claiming Encode showed that 80% of the human genome is transcribed. That's just factually not true, but he's claimed it multiple times. Claiming that only humans and Neanderthals have a hyoid bone and nobody else has it. So I figure add that to the list. That was the topic of the video we were commenting on. And then there's the whole all animals originated at the same time thing. That's from that mitochondrial bottleneck study. I actually covered that in a creation myth not that long ago. And I said both misrepresenting that paper and then claiming Rawmat never said what he said about that paper showing that everyone originated at the same time. Technically, that one's a twofer. So I said, okay, that's 6, I guess. But, I can keep going because, Standing for Truth makes a lot of errors. So let's just do 5 more, right? So I said, ERVs aren't from retroviruses. That's a thing he's claimed and continues to claim. Lots of new genetic disorders are appearing in humans, each year, we're just mutating a lot and getting lots of new genetic disorders. It's not true. We're actually just getting better at finding the rare ones. That's what's happening. Created heterozygosity can explain allelic diversity in humans. It can. I've done the math on that. African populations do recombination at a faster rate than all other populations. The truth is that they have more hotspots, but the net rate has not been demonstrated to be higher. The net rate is the same. And then also, they keep claiming they have a solution to the heat problem, and they don't. So I think that one's fun. So let's put that on the list. That's the heat problem for the flood, that like the physics of the flood vaporized the surface of the planet. So you can't, nobody could survive. So that's what I said. And now SFT responded with a short comment saying his long comment didn't post, but that he'd post it somewhere else. And I found where he posted it. So it was on a community post that he made on his channel where I can't respond, which is a fun way of having a debate. Post your response to somebody where they can't respond to you. But that's fine. I'll just respond here. Why not? So before I get to the responses, such as they are, I want to just kind of point out to all of you that as we go through these, what I want you to do is ask, as we go through point by point, his answer to each one of these things, does he address the specific critique in question or not? And if not, what does he do instead to try to deal with it? So let's do it. Let's go through. So this is kind of a long thing, so I split it into two parts. And I hope the text is big enough. I could blow it up more, but then we have to zoom in and around. I hope this is big enough that you could read it, but I'm going to read it out loud, so you shouldn't have to read it in order to get this. And again, I apologize for my voice. I am on the tail end of a cold here. Sorry. So let's do it. The top part is just the usual, middle school playground kind of stuff. So we're going to skip that, but we'll go right down here. He starts with inbreeding leads to genetic drift, which leads to a general loss of genetic diversity. Yes, a loss of genetic diversity is the opposite of hypermutation. The claim in the past has been that Neanderthals were hypermutating. That explains their divergence from Homo sapiens. But they're also highly inbred. So he said those are the same thing because the inbreeding leads to more mutations accumulating, therefore they're hypermutating. No, hypermutating is you get lots of variation. Inbreeding is you get very little variation. They're opposites. So what he says here, inbreeding leads to genetic drift, which leads to general loss of genetic diversity. Yes, exactly. That's the opposite of hypermutating. The probability of any variation being retained is proportional to its frequency. Yes. So yes, rare alleles are more easily lost. Yes, but random chance has a stronger role in small populations. Yes. Meaning even deleterious mutations can increase in frequency. Yes. Even to the point of fixation. Yes. And when you get to fixation, there's no other variation at that site in the genome. So you've lost diversity. That's the opposite of hypermutating. This is the whole reason we worry about endangered species. Yes, it's called an extinction vortex. He goes on, you can have inbreeding and also rapid mutation fixation. True, but again, once you have fixation, you no longer have polymorphisms at those loci, which means low diversity. With hypermutation, you get a lot of polymorphism. That's what happens when you're hypermutating. So again, not catching the problem here, not addressing the critique, which would lead to genetic differences, let's say, between Neanderthals and modern humans. Yeah. So that's it for that inbreeding versus hypermutating thing. And he didn't actually address the problem and seems to still, I don't know, but it didn't address the thing where he's conflated them in the past to explain how Neanderthals are supposed to work. Next one down here, hyoid bone. I've already responded in great detail. It looks like you're dodging this argument as well. Now, the thing that SFT said was that only humans and Neanderthals have a hyoid bone. That's wrong. Lots of things have hyoid bones. It's not more complicated than that. Like, nothing else is relevant to him being corrected on this. It's just lots of things have hyoid bones. And it's not more complicated. Primates, other things, lots of things have hyoid bones, I've learned recently. Oh, what just happened there? Sorry. Okay, so he says, tell us, Dr. Dan, how did the human-specific hyoid bone that allows for sophisticated language and communication come about? Don't give me a story. I want empirical evidence. Go ahead. I'm waiting. It's not relevant. It's changing the topic. Why are you changing the topic? You said only two things have that bone, humans and I should say Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, and that's untrue. Lots of other things have one. Why are you changing the topic to something that's unrelated? Okay, moving on. Sorry. And wow, you're repeating this misunderstanding of the genetic boundary study. So now we're jumping down to that the separate ancestry study that I mentioned. It was we're now on this one, the all animals originated at the same time thing. That's what he's talking about here with this genetic boundaries study. You really need to watch our 2+ hour rebuttal to your video. I'm not watching 2+ hours. It's not going to happen. We aren't and have never been referring to the creation event. We are and have always been referring to the flood bottleneck. Maybe this is why most top yeks have discarded you as a waste of time. It's weird how a bunch of them come to my channel. You can't even get the basics right of our arguments, let alone provide a sophisticated rebuttal. I post the links to where we have addressed your argument, blah, blah. I fear the comment will be held back for view and not posted. Okay, so we didn't post the link, but they are all available on our 2 channels and website, not difficult to find. So on this one, I need to issue a slight correction. So I actually said 2 things in this one where they messed up. I said that they misrepresented that paper, the all animals originated at the same time mitochondrial bottleneck paper, and then claimed that Raw Matt never said what he said. The video I'm referring to, what I meant is that Raw Matt said that all animals originate at the same time. I went back and checked that video just a little while ago, and you know what? I'll give him this one. Raw Matt didn't say that in that video. They've said it elsewhere, but they didn't say it in that specific video. It's like a half-hour thing, and I went through the transcripts, and I couldn't find it. So I think they didn't say it in that video. I think they say it elsewhere, but not the one that I was specifically referring to. However, I am going to go 1 for 1 on this double critique right here, because they do represent that. They do misrepresent that paper egregiously, which, as I said at the top, these are not professionals that we're dealing with tonight. So, I mean, they're just kind of laundering what the professional organizations say, and the professional organizations misrepresent that paper too. So, but you know what? Credit where it's due. They didn't say the thing I thought they said in the video I was referring to. So that's fair. I'll take the L on that one. All right. And that's it for that first half. So let's go to part 2. Now, regarding Encode, now before we go any further, the thing that I pointed out, the specific error that I pointed out, was the idea that SFT has repeatedly said that Encode found that over 80% of the human genome is transcribed to RNA. That's the specific thing that I pointed out in my comment. Now, let's look at this. Regarding Encode and junk DNA, Dr. Fuzz Rana and I did a very thorough 2-part series refuting every one of your arguments. I only made one argument here. I wrote a long article summarizing the 2-part series on Patreon, which is available to the public, and the event itself can be found on the homepage of our website and, of course, both our channels. And no, you did not respond to the counter-arguments. You bizarrely responded to an older Dr. Rana article and ignored all the counter-arguments. Man, you are a dodgy man. I appreciate that at the end there. So he's referring to a Twitter exchange I had with Dr. Rana a while back, I think, but none of this is referring to the 80% transcribed thing. The actual number from the Encode study, the famous one, the 2012 one, is that 80.4% of the human genome has some biochemical activity. That could be transcription, protein binding, methylation, anything like that, biochemical activity. SFT has repeatedly cited that study to say that 80% of the genome is transcribed. And I've corrected him on that more than once, but keeps coming up. And here you see he doesn't, address that at all, right? Oh, well. And then we get to ERVs. This is endogenous retroviruses. So ERVs are the remnants of retroviruses in our genome that integrated and then mutated and got broken and got stuck. And then they mutate and degenerate over time. They're clearly the remnants of viruses. So he says, this is wrong. This is just an assertion you have made. I wrote an incredibly detailed article on ERVs that address ERVs as evidence for evolution in great detail. This can be found on Patreon. And I have had numerous debates on ERVs with still zero refutation of my main points. So no, you are wrong. I don't see an attempt to correct me in here. I just see you're wrong. I've demonstrated it somewhere. But if you're responding to somebody making an argument, state the counter argument, maybe, rather than just wave your hands around and say that you've made the argument and you're actually correct and they're wrong. The truth with ERVs is that they're clearly derived from viruses, and I do plan to do something longer on this in the near future. And I'll also note that a lot of young Earth creationists agree that ERVs are derived from viruses because it's undeniable that they are. ERVs, like when you do the phylogeny of ERV sequences, they nest within retroviral sequences. They have sequences like both the end regions and the genes that are only found in retroviruses, and they can actually be expressed in the human genome. Like some of the genes from these dead viruses can be expressed and cause problems. It's one reason we tend to suppress them in our genome, because when we make the viral proteins, it can cause a problem. And then really cool thing that you can do with ERVs is you could actually fix them, basically, because you can find them that are largely complete, but they're mutated, so they don't work. You can actually fix them, and then they'll actually remobilize as, kind of working retroviruses. It's something you can do, which is super cool. It's just all the evidence just says like they're from retroviruses, and that's the end of it. We can even find insertions that are not fixed in the human genome, which is super cool. So we can find them kind of in progress. And it'll be really cool to see if they reach fixation or if they get lost. And obviously, I won't be around to find that out, but eventually we'll know for the ones that are found in some people, but not others. And then we get down to here, we get to created heterozygosity. This is something that I've addressed on my channel at length. I have a creation myth on it where I actually did math and shown that the creationist argument doesn't work here. So he says, in your arguments pertaining to created heterozygosity, you are forgetting its design diversity plus mutations over time and molecular clocks we addressed incredibly thoroughly in our PBSEON, I don't know what that is, video. So many of our arguments just completely ignored. Baffling. So couple things here. One, in my argument that demonstrated that created heterozygosity doesn't work, I used numbers. I actually did the math to calculate the rate of recombination that would be required and show how it's many orders of magnitude faster than what we actually observe. And it's just not possible in the young Earth timeline. Second thing is he's actually misrepresenting the creationist model here. Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson is kind of the main guy with the created heterozygosity thing. He talks about this at length in Replacing Darwin, his 2017 book. And he very specifically points out that mutation is not part of his model, basically. He says that over 99% of the existing diversity is due to the created heterozygosity and recombination. You don't need mutation present to explain the existing diversity. So invoking mutation here is a twofer as far as I'm concerned. One, it concedes the point that recombination from your original design state is insufficient to do the job. But two, by invoking mutation, you're also actually conflicting with the main young Earth model on this question. So thanks for that. And then lastly, we did discuss recombination rates. This is the last one where where they claim that in African populations, you have faster recombination, like the rate of recombination per meiosis is actually higher than in non-African populations. The argument that creationists make is that they have more of a specific site in their genomes that is a hotspot for recombination. So you have more of these sites, you have more recombination. So this is what they say right here. We discussed recombination rates in great detail in our most comprehensive video on Neanderthals. For sake of time, I will sum it up what Dr. Rob Carter has to say on the matter. Higher recombination rates. Now, I want to this is real smooth, so just watch this here. Higher recombination rates will lead to the preservation of more genetic diversity over time, giving the appearance of an older population. And if two populations have dissimilar recombination rates, their clocks will not necessarily tick at the same rate, especially if one population is small. Now, notice that's quoting Dr. Rob Carter. Now, notice what Rob Carter didn't say there. He didn't say that we've documented higher recombination rates in some people compared to others. He's just saying, if we did, this is what we would see. But he's not saying we've actually observed it. My specific critique that I pointed out here was that there's not a higher rate. There's more hotspots. So the recombination is concentrated at those hotspots, but the net rate has not been observed to be faster. Nothing said right here conflicts what I said. He's just quoting what Rob Carter said would be the consequence of having a higher net rate, but there's no attempt to defend the notion that there actually is variation in the rate across Homo sapiens. So they didn't address the thing that I said there, right? So let's just summarize. I'm going to go back to my post here, and I'll zoom in so you can read that maybe a little bit better. So I'm just going to summarize kind of the tactics that we saw here. Okay. So think about, did he actually address any of the very specific arguments I made here? I pointed out very specific errors. Did he actually address any of those very specific errors? No. What did he do instead? Well, it's going to change the topic to something else, like with the hyoid bone. It wasn't A and B have it, nobody else has it. Well, that's wrong. C, D, E, F, a bunch of other things have it. Oh, well, how did it evolve? How did it evolve to allow speech? Tell me exactly how that happened and give me evidence. That's not relevant. That's not relevant at all. Didn't answer the question. You could also just posture without making an argument and hope nobody notices, right? So this is what we did with herbs, right? Oh, I addressed that. Smokescreen. I addressed it somewhere else. But you didn't attempt to address it here. Like, you had the room to do it. It's on your channel. You could link the things. You didn't link them. So there's no attempt to do it. Just kind of hope nobody notices. Another one that we saw with the inbreeding and hypermutation, the very first one we saw, right, with this is just repeat yourself and hope nobody notices. Right, so that's the whole thing about, like, well, small inbreeding populations, more deleterious mutations, reach fixation. Like, yeah, that's the script, right? So just go back to the script and hope your audience doesn't notice that you just repeated yourself instead of addressing, like, the critique of the thing. So you say a thing, it gets criticized, and somebody explains why it's wrong, and then in response, you just repeat the same thing, something creationists do all the time, right? And this is a nice example of it right here. And then the other one is just point out that, oh, we've made this argument before at length, right? This is what they did with the Encode answer. We've made this argument before. We did 2 parts, right? We've addressed all your arguments, right? Not pointing out which, addressing the specific thing. They're saying, I've addressed your arguments, blanket, ignoring the specific thing that was part of this specific conversation. And a bonus there that you get when you're dealing with the randos rather than the professionals is you get a little argument for from authority with good measure, right? It's like we talked this over with Fuzz Rana, and he addressed everything. It's like, well, I disagree with him, and you didn't address the thing. And what I pointed out is something you said, not something he said. So maybe address it, but don't. And then the other tactic that we see here is a really nifty one, because I don't know if any of you were counting, but at the beginning, right, and he said name 5, and then I did 5 and 5, so I gave him 10. I don't know if any of you were counting as we went through this, but he only covered 7. So the other creationist tactic that we see all the time, in addition to, oh, we already covered this, don't worry about it, or I'm just going to repeat myself, or I'm going to change the topic to something else, right, that wasn't the actual question, or I'm going to name drop some famous person and say you're disagreeing with them and how dare you, right? All else fails, just ignore the critique entirely, pretend it doesn't exist. Because in this response, we didn't get an answer to? We didn't get an answer to the confusion between diversity and divergence. We didn't get an answer to the claim that there's lots of new genetic disorders appearing in humanity. Young Earth creationists like SFT claim it's because of genetic entropy, and we're mutating a lot. It's actually because we're just sequencing more genomes and we're finding the genetic basis for rare diseases more frequently now. And he also didn't say anything about the heat problem, because they don't have a solution to it. No matter how hard they try, there isn't one. That's 3 out of 10. They just ignored entirely. That was the answer. The answer was no answer. So that's I hope you all enjoyed that. That's all I got right now. That was a kind of a stroll through YouTube young Earth creationism and just kind of the tactics that are employed when very specific, very particular errors are pointed out, and how they address that. What you should do in that case is, like with the hyoid bone, for example, or the 80%, the claim that 80% transcribed, right? Something that's just like crystal clear, like it's just factually wrong. Just take the L and get it right in the future. It's not that hard. How hard is it to say 80% biochemical activity? versus 80% transcribed. It shouldn't be that hard, but apparently it is, because once you make the error, the instinct is to double down rather than correcting the statement and getting it right in the future. So I hope that was a useful illustration of some of the tactics you see, and kind of educational in terms of being able to constructively point out, like, no, that's a separate question, stay on topic. And when you're having these conversations, pin people down. Don't let them wriggle into some other thing or pretend that they answered it somewhere else. You're having a conversation, pin them down. Don't let them obfuscate. Don't let them, just throw up smoke and pretend that they've addressed the critique when they haven't. So that is it for this one, everybody. So before I go, I just want to remind everybody that it is April 10th, 2022. If you are watching this before Wednesday, April 13th, 2022, I will be reviewing Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson's new book, Traced, right here on this channel at 9 p.m. on April 13th. That's 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on April 13th, 2022. So if you are watching this live or before then, check out that review of Dr. Jeanson's new book. And if you are watching this from the future, go back and also watch the review of the book, because I think that will be / was, depending on when you watch this, a lot of fun. Thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you have a great night, and I will see you on Wednesday for the review of Traced.